Good morning. My name is Vikas Mohan, and on behalf of CII, I welcome you all to the 14th edition of the CII Corporate Governance Summit. After the inaugural session in the morning, we have the first plenary with the theme Governance in COVID-19 Crisis, Board's Preparedness to Manage Disruption. The discussions during the panel will broadly focus on important issues revolving around growing responsibilities and increasing expectations from the board as to how proficient and adept it is and how proactive board members are in crystal gazing any black swan and unprecedented event like COVID-19 and then quickly churn out survival strategies, rapid action and business continuity plans. The complete shift to the digital platform, coupled with work from home, has made usage of digital technology and focus on cybersecurity prime. By focusing on internal systems, there is also enhanced need and communication to stakeholder management to ensure business continuity and growth. Dealing with stakeholders, including customers, employees, investors, vendor partners, government, and society, are the key agenda items for boardroom discussions. The pandemic has asserted more than ever before that the board needs to continually steer and stick to the basic principles of transparency, ethics, and governance, more so in the times of crisis. Well, I will not go into any details as we have very eminent and distinguished panel with us, and all of them practically and firsthand have experienced and steered and navigated through the COVID-19 challenges. It is my pleasure to introduce Zia Modi, Chairperson, CII National Committee on Regulatory Affairs and co-founder and managing partner, AZB and Partners. Kaku Nakhate, President and Country Head, India, Bank of America. Rupen Zaveri, Managing Director, KKR. Mr. Shashi Kiran Shetty, Chairman, All Cargo Logistics. Ashu Suyash, Managing Director and CEO, CRISIL. And Alok Kshirsagar, Senior Partner, McKinsey and Company. All are respective leaders and proven experts in their respective fields. So without much ado, and before inviting Zia, I would also like to thank and put on record our sincere appreciation for Prerak Ved, partner AZB, who has also helped us in putting this session together. So with these words, I welcome you all once again, and may I now invite Ms. Zia Modi, Chairperson, CII National Committee on Regulatory Affairs and co-founder and managing partner, AZB and Partners, for her opening remarks and for moderating the session, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Vikas. Welcome to my fellow panelists. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you, and nice to catch up, even if in a slightly more formal way. COVID has put us in a remote sense away from each other. There are no hugs and more hugs that all of us are used to. So it's really nice to see all of you. And to the audience, I hope you find the session interesting. We've really got people with wisdom and experience of what the last year has brought about. The topic is, what is the preparedness of boards to manage disruption, and what better situation to pick their brains than in relation to what we've gone through last year. It's been unpredictable. It has in a way reinforced the vigilance requirement of our board and each of their members, especially the independents. So what has been the survival game plan for each of the panelists? They are in different fields, and as you can see, they will bring in their experiences pretty well, I'm sure. And then how do you really maintain that line of communication? How do you maintain the trust of the messaging that is coming through from management and from leadership to the company and the workforce as a whole? What is the stickiness, if you like, that is going to keep people together? I always say it is ultimately affection. But what is the ways in which leadership and the board and the management demonstrate stickiness? The first thing, obviously, all of us when COVID struck was, what the hell? What the hell? I know I just went into panic mode as a managing partner. I said, my God, 450 lawyers, what's going to happen to us, to them, to me, to our clients? And it was like, a bright light was shining in our eyes for at least a month, at least for me. And then, what did all of you do in terms of how did you reach out to your stakeholders for support, for understanding, for collaboration? What did you reach out to the board members, and what did you expect, and what did they give you, and were those expectations met? Really, I thought the biggest challenge was the shutdown of global supply chains, market loss, business interruption, and the China angle that came in at that time. We couldn't import, China being such an integral part of everybody's global supply chain, including ours. And so then, were we really focusing on other things? We were talking before the panel started about employee health, employee safety, employee mental safety, and health. What did we do for that? I just saw a need for capital, a need for having enough cushion for capital in a lot of the businesses that we advised. But how did that translate? And our panelists will certainly tell us. So while growth and profitability are always important, I think in pandemic, just sustaining what we had and stopping the bleeding was really the achievement of the hour for a lot of people. And so I think, without further ado, let's jump into what our panelists have to say. I think that I went away, and I still go away with an important lesson that COVID has taught me: communication and more communication. There's nothing like over communication in these times. And I think that, from the point of view of managing boards, virtual meetings, that is all happening. That is not bad, good, probably will continue post pandemic. But let's start off with Rupen. Rupen is, of course, a key player at the huge big boy private equity firm, KKR, and has been around to see a lot of experience he's had on the boards of investee companies. And so, Rupen, how would you say that they have addressed disruptions? What do you say about their issues on business continuity? Have they changed fast enough? Were you much more involved in the boards? How were you involved in that sense with the boards? What did you do that was different? And how did you help in this process? Over to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you everyone, and for those we haven't met before, good morning to you all. Thanks for laying down the questions here. First of all, I will tell you, we were all in shock, to be honest. I mean, we would be lying to say that we had a plan and we were prepared. I think there was still a sense of denial going into March. This is last March, the first week, second week, okay, things will become better. And to be very candid, until 16, 17, when flights first started to shut down, and then came the eventual lockdown, that's when the real hit came to your mind that, oh, we really have a problem. The first reaction, to be very candid, was one of panic. We have investee companies who are in education, hospital, waste management. So you're thinking of impact from every potential way. And the first thing was just panic. We were also dealing with the way at least firms like ours are set up, a lot of global leadership, regional leadership, all falling on us like a ton of bricks, to be very candid. What is the impact of ABCD on your company? Do we have enough liquidity? Do we have enough cash flow? And here we are thinking, we don't know anything. This is literally 24 hours old. So that being said, I will tell you, the way the boards reacted surprised me at the end of the day. I think while the initial panic was there, people got together and prioritized. Those priorities in our mind were as follows. First and foremost, and I think you said this, was employee health and safety. Um, we made sure that people knew what the SOPs were. The first program was just what the SOPs were in terms of work from home. We ensured that there was enough IT equipment available to people. This is both at our firm, but more importantly, our investee companies. We ensured there were additional investments that the board approved if we had to upgrade our IT spend, because we were not ready. Okay, KKR may be ready, but I don't think our workforce and
Correct.
the investee companies were ready. So those were the first kind of CapExes and OpExes that were approved, blank check. Okay, do what's required to make sure they are there. The board quickly jumped into cash flows and liquidity. Again, we were fortunate. We weren't running very, very levered companies, but the two, three things that the board immediately did was draw down on every single working capital line that is available to you. Even if it meant running a negative drag on interest rate because of what you're paying versus what you make in liquid. We said just draw down every single. We don't know when this will end. And part of our fear, Zia and panelists, came from what we saw in 2008. I didn't personally experience that in India, but global colleagues tell us that lines that were available to you at that time, which were sanctioned, were also pulled. So you really found yourself in a liquidity crisis. So within literally the first 2 3 days, we drew down every piece of liquidity
Wow.
that was available to us. The next thing I think the boards were really focused on, especially for industry type investments, was wherever there's toxicity involved, toxic materials, flammable stuff, because we were worried if this went into an extended lockdown, what will happen to those materials there? What does the impact to just keeping them shut if you don't treat them, etc. So huge task forces were involved to ensure the EHS side of the factory or operations were well taken care of also. So that took a while because movement was still restricted,
Sure.
but that was pretty critical. And then, over time, what we realized, and these were some of the pre-discussions we had, is how to take care of employee welfare. What we realized that we were stepping on each other's shoes as it relates to timings. There was no weekend, there was no 8 o'clock in the night, there was no holidays. Everyone was on Zooms and Microsoft Teams, and people were getting burnt out. So board actually acknowledged that to some extent also. Guys, like, are we pushing our employees too much? So we created certain rules starting right from the leadership as to how we should try to conduct our workday on Zoom/Teams as if it was in the office to ensure people get space. We actually encourage the employees to tell us that if an example, you're a woman, I'm not trying to be biased here, but if you're looking after a kid on school and you need to be off between 9 and 11 in the morning because schools mandate you to be, just tell us. It's okay. Nothing will happen during that time. So we started going to this level of detail wherever practical. It wasn't possible to do it for everybody. And I think the employees really liked it. They were quite receptive to the management teams and board. But it took us a while to get there. We didn't really appreciate this at the beginning, to be very candid. This took us few days, few months to get there. And then lastly, the board was quite instrumental in putting together resources or pushing the management to put together resources on counseling. So we actually made counseling available to some of our key employees. Definitely at KKR, it was available to all of us also. Different types of counseling. Some people wanted childcare related counseling. Some people wanted mental, etc. Whatever it is.
Did
Um,
people
uh,
take up that offer? Did they take up
you
that offer?
know, I don't have the data to be very honest, but I know that some did. I think there is a bit of a acknowledgement issue in India, and I think Ashu, you were referring to that earlier. So I don't think people took it up as much, but I think from a board standpoint, they wanted to be seen as providing all the tools and resources available to the relevant segment. Now, obviously, this
Right.
cannot be taken down to the factory worker level. So net, I would summarize to say, started off with panic, didn't know what to do, ended up being quite smooth because the board was quite focused and very clear on what needed to be done. And this was aided by the fact that we had some very strong personalities on the board. I think we would have struggled if it was just KKR people and not actual operating people who've been CEOs and chairmen who've seen a lot more crises. And so we've been fortunate to have good independent directors, good non-executive chairmen who help drive some of this agenda. So let me pause here. Sorry for the long monologue.
Thank you. That's useful. Uh, Shashi, over to you. As we were saying before the panel started, you are the one person who actually was operating on the ground full steam during COVID. And so, what would you say were the lessons that came to you during that period? You were talking about having a direct and indirect employment of about 12,000 people, which is huge, and that your operations, by their very nature of logistics, couldn't stop. As a founder, how did you react? What did you think? What was the fallout? What were the disruptions? And what were the challenges that you felt you achieved? And where could you not achieve? Where did you fail?
You're on mute, Shashi. First of all, thank you, Zia, and thank you all the panelists. And it's a privilege to be here talking to all of you. I have to be very careful when Suyash is here, Ashu is here, being this, she should not re-rate our company. But I think she'll be happy to hear my story. Look, I think we learned a lot from the financial crisis, okay, in 2008 and 9, when the whole business fell off the cliff, right? And that taught us a lot. And we, are very happy to say that crisis brings an opportunity, right? So that's a very strong message that we had learned and we achieved during the financial crisis, and kind of brought it forward and brought the similar mindset in the mind of people and not allowed anyone to panic. Although I was panicking a lot. The reason mainly is because, end of the day, ours is the main business, which gives over 85% of our revenue, is a low margin business, right? Like I told you, we have to run 2,500 trade lanes. And if we don't fill our containers, you have a fixed cost, but you will start making losses on a gross profit level. And that can impact financially quite significantly, right? So obviously, the first and the foremost thing that what I tried to do is stay positive, didn't show my serious concern about what would happen in the future, how long this would last, what could be the impact. I kind of mobilized and kept people positive and motivated to begin with, and then formed what you call as business continuity team. Okay, and I didn't participate in all of them because many times what happens is when you're there, people don't talk, right? I wanted a very open conversation, and then I would take a feedback every second day or something like that, and get a sense of what's going on. For me, for us, it was not one crisis. Okay, we actually had 5 crises in the last 1.5 years. It's quite remarkable. I can actually write a book about this whole last 1.5 years. But I am so thankful that I have a second home, and I moved with my family to the home. I stay in Ambi Valley, and I stayed here for about 9 months with my full family, my joint MD, who's my brother-in-law. We operated from here. So what are the 5 crises? Number 1 is COVID. Number 2 is the acquisition of the company called Gati, which happened just before the crisis. Okay, just before the crisis, we had signed. We had on the open offer. We became 45% shareholders. Our first board meeting happened offline on Zoom. And probably you must have read that we had serious problem with the erstwhile management, promoters, board, chairman, and they were all very hostile. Okay, we had to go all the way to Supreme Court in the middle of the crisis to get the board, the MD to step down, and we had the chairman was supporting that previous promoter, and we had that gentleman will not call for the meetings of the board meetings because he's the chairman, right? So there are multiple directors who are also in his favor, and there's a big board. There are 12 members in the board.
Wow.
So anyway, so we somehow got all the issues resolved, and then got the chairman to resign, and eventually settled with the promoter. Then he left after about 8 months or so. 8 months he has still us.
8 months, that's a long time.
Long time after the acquisition. Anyway, so all that is history. Then we reduced the number of board. We brought in our board members. Obviously, our management team stayed back. The MD wanted to, the deputy MD or CEO of the company, he wanted to leave in the middle of all this. And the business, the Gati business, particularly because of the lockdown, 3 months, business almost became zero, right? We lost a lot of money operationally. And so that was another major crisis. Soon after that, in our container freight station, where the containers would come, the ships would come, and ships would discharge the container into the terminal. And if you don't evacuate the containers, the whole port would get choked, and you can't accommodate new ships. So we had to evacuate the containers middle of the COVID crisis to our CFSs, right? So we had to have drivers, cleaners, supervisors, and all the staff who should be available to do that round the clock in the middle of the crisis. All right. So this across the country, not only JNPT, everywhere. So we had to manage that part. And in the process, what happened? The port got decongested, containers came into the CFS. And that brings us to the next crisis. The containers came and stayed in our CFSs for a long period of time. Consignees are not available to come and pick up their containers.
Correct.
Containers stayed on in the CFS. And obviously, we have to charge the ground rent for the containers which are staying. We obviously made a settlement. The government wanted us to charge nothing the entire period when the containers are staying there. So we said it is very unreasonable. We are willing to give 50% off, but government would make our life very miserable, right? So we had to fight out with the government. We had to, again, there's a case happened by one of the trade association, took our association to the court, and that matter is still in the Supreme Court. We also went to the Supreme Court to fight that case. So, so that is a crisis caused by the government. And we felt so ungrateful by the government because we evacuated the port, kept the port running in the middle of the crisis. And when the containers
they still wanted you to do this.
Wanted to be unreasonable, right? So that's the other part. So then after all this happened, we got a cyber attack on our global operation. And that whole damn thing came to a standstill. So it was a ransom attack, obviously, and our systems were down. Our old data got encrypted. Fortunately, we had the backup, but we had to reconstruct all our data centers globally, remotely. It's 5 data centers around the world.
God.
So we obviously didn't pay the ransomware. We fought it out, although we had the insurance. Our people really showed tremendous amount of resilience. I found a very dear friend of mine who recently started a consulting company on cyber attack. I fortunately found him, hired him, he sent his people, he helped us. So that was the next crisis. And on top of that, we have this container shortage crisis soon after that, right? We have cargo coming in, but there are no containers. So, you have to deal with the shippers asking for space and, using all sorts of pressure, etc. So, went one after the other, and fortunately there was no health crisis, and there is nothing really much happened either to our staff or to any of our family. That's a big relief, touch wood. So I think we kept the whole employee engagement going with me getting involved in calls every week, management team doing a weekly meeting with the people. We, had to bring down, we had found, like I said, crisis is an opportunity. We looked at everything that we can work on in terms of bringing our costs down. Some of the governments internationally gave us the COVID relief in terms of the salary reimbursement to some of the staff. So that helped. And we also made our life a little more complicated by getting into 2 transformation projects. One is with our friends in McKinsey. Alok would know Shirish. Shirish is driving the transformation project for our global operation. That also was started just before the crisis, by the way. So it kept us extremely, extremely busy. And I feel very good when I look back what we have achieved. We have some of the board members obviously helped us through the crisis, particularly to name Kaivan Kalyaniwala, who's one of our senior lawyer who's been in the board for many years.
Good Parsi, good Parsi.
Good Parsi, good Parsi, absolutely. So, and we have a couple of members in our global board, a gentleman from Belgium who was ex-CEO of Port of Antwerp. And we have Mr. Bansal, who's also been in the board for many, many years. So they helped in many ways. I don't want to get into detail, but so I think overall it has been extremely exciting, very learning and very taxing, so that's what I want to quickly share. Thank you.
Amazing. I think this I'm certainly grateful that I didn't have all the 5 crises. You did, Tashi, for sure. As I say, it's okay if my hair doesn't become white too soon. God doesn't have to test us so much. Well done. I mean, all this during this year, and not being able to really walk out into the field and meet your people and, communicate face to face in the
Everything
struggle.
happened. Everything happened on Zoom calls or video calls, telephone calls. I obviously visited the office many times in the middle, but always came back here after a few days. By the way, in the middle of all that, I was also moving into my new home. So there was, how it is when you go to a new house. So that was adding to the pressure. By the way, I also played a lot of golf here in Ambi Valley, so I can't
That's
complain.
why you're at Ambi. That's right. That's right.
and we
good
had
things
some
come
good
out of
parties,
this.
good parties as well with our neighbors, so so overall it was a
Some
mix.
human touch. Some human touch. Yes.
Yes.
Great. I mean, I'm sure the audience is, learning a lot from this interaction. Ashu, let's skip to you now because I hope you won't take too much into account if there's anything that Shashi has said for your rating. But obviously, he's come out with flying colors, so that's the bottom line. But tell me, how did you react as a a major rating agency in terms of COVID? How did you view your clients differently, the companies differently? What did you do as a board and senior management to deal with the disruption? I think that the audience will be fascinated to hear how you engineered the whole process.
Thanks, Zia, and it's great to be with such fantastic participants. So much of learning as well. You suddenly feel that your own problems were really nothing, especially after hearing Shashi. See, the unique thing for companies like us, whoever are in the services business, this crisis is a big call out because the only capital that we really have is our people. We're a human capital business, and this crisis is a human crisis. In that sense, I think early on, one of the things that I kept telling the team and the board, listen, let's not even try to draw parallels from the global financial crisis because that was a financial crisis. This is a human crisis.
Correct.
Let's lead from a people first approach. What really, helped us prepare early is the fact that being a global company, we also had offices in China. The China unit obviously was impacted first, and we had moved into mandatory work from home back end of December. So even before it had become a big issue, because
really,
because when we started hearing about it, we first went, okay, voluntary, come if you feel comfortable. And by the time the news got around, we were already had moved into mandatory work from home. And that's like a 60, 70 member office. And that meant that you literally had to revisit BCP. That part was easy because, during the time we were still adjusting, we were able to meet deliveries from another location of ours. So, that was simple. But that helped us really think on our feet. Yeah, what if this is another location? And before we realized it, it was Europe and then the US and then India. But that meant that the conversation had dialed up at the board level. And there are really three things that, we kind of did, which were a little different. One, we realized that the casualty is going to be supply chain. The first casualty in all of this, even before the global lockdown. And in a services context, right, work from home is very easy, but provided your supply chain on the technology side, right, just the backup laptops and stuff like that, even that deliveries were already running delayed, right? So we did a very simple thing. We had this global program of shipping desktops home where people did not have laptops because, not everybody in any organization would have laptops. And that allowed us to move very swiftly before lockdown started getting announced. And mind you, government policies on some of these get very difficult. In Argentina, you can't pull out machines from the office. It needs a very elaborate procedure. And when we triggered that procedure, that country announced lockdown. So, it's funny that when you start moving with good intention, you have to deal with all of that.
Yeah.
That actually brought to the forefront that it's not only about making sure you do well, but how do you start pushing the envelope on ease of doing business during this time, working with governments, working with regulators, because that Argentina experience made us begin to engage with the SEZ policy in India to say, look, we need to start looking at that very differently. And some of those restrictions need to have a window where companies can be supported rather than any pushback coming, because this is a kind of global crisis. And as we were doing that, the lockdown for India had already been announced. Our teams were comfortable out there. Uh, in parallel, knowing very well that you could have desktop crashes and people couldn't go into homes because of the way the lockdown restrictions were, we doubled down on moving to the cloud. We doubled down on adopting virtual desktops as well, so that our employees, whatever device they had, accessing data in a secure way became much, much easier. In parallel, we really invested very heavily in our people. And I use the word invested because I think if anybody was in the manufacturing side, they talk about how they look after their, their IP. And for us, everything is people, right? And
Correct.
our program covered not just employees by their families, and we invested in isolation centers because we realized that if any member of a family got impacted, and if you're in a small home in a city like Mumbai, how do you expect the employee to continue to give their best? And that, I think, did wonders in terms of pulling the team together. And I got strong support from the board, because you can imagine the conversation by then had already begun to move towards, productivity, cost saves, etc. We're also a listed entity.
But how did you, when you say invested in isolation centers, what do you mean? You blocked hotel rooms in bulk or what?
Buildings, hotels, rooms. We started then working with the other companies, saying, we may not use all of them, so let's kind of do a share model.
Understood.
And that, was a very big thing for our employees, and that really helped them very willingly extend working hours, because there was no divide between personal time. And the third angle was, what do we do to help on the regulatory framework side? Because there was so much of change happening. SEZ was another example. It was amply clear that the credit environment was not going to be comfortable. So to begin to talk about, early days, we started talking about perhaps this is the time for a moratorium. Because this is not the global financial crisis. This is a very different crisis. This is global. A lot of things that are happening are outside the realm of reality. So we need a very, very supportive policy and government. And, we started talking about this is not the time to really cringe on fiscal deficit going out of control. And our models started talking about how we see GDP coming off and fiscal deficits increasing. See, all of that helps, because in the kind of business we are, what we talk, I believe, has a major impact on the way reform and policy moves happen. And we work very closely with RBI and SEBI. And SEBI, even as a rating agency, we said, look, this is not the time for downgrades in a massive way. Because with supply chain disrupting, with the shutdown, production is going to be impacted. Goods ready to be shipped to be sold are not going to happen. People who want to buy will not buy. People will not buy, will postpone their demand, right? And it was great that SEBI actually gave that leeway, because the definition of rating is 1 rupee, 1 day, and D, or default mode, right?
So how did they, how did they, given
Yes.
that, they want the market to make sure that
So they
the paper
actually,
is safe, what did you
yes.
achieve?
So what they did was they said that if this is on account of COVID, use your judgment and don't go on this massive downgrade spree. And we worked with them to say we have to distinguish between what's COVID led and what was anyway in crisis mode way before all of this happened. And working closely with them had that kind of a change announced for the COVID period. And that actually contributed immensely to the orderly functioning of markets, because moratorium without this move from SEBI could have meant market disruption.
Correct.
Right? At the same time, our investors were very grateful that they continued to see updates. In fact, we moved to, surveilling monthly. We moved to continuous announcements across sectors, right? Going into details. And the most important thing, the model of engagement, and that's where we really retuned the workforce and said, look, as people in the rating business, don't directly jump into liquidity questions. First, just inquire from the owner or the member of the board, how are you doing? Is everything okay? Make that first wellness call. That was a mandate. And, people were quite shocked. But we said, look, this is different. You need to operate differently. And guess what? That allowed us incredible access to promoters, to boards, the kind of participation we saw and the open dialogue was tremendous. And that also meant that CRISIL's business through this period,
Correct.
was very resilient. And, the other thing which I must talk about is how we work to create a resilience framework. We shared our learnings, we incorporated learnings, and then from a rating perspective, announced this resilience framework across sectors, talking about most vulnerable, the next level, and the ones that are least vulnerable, so that they gave the whole marketplace a lens through which they could begin to look at their investments through this period. And finally, from a board perspective, beyond how do you look at investments, we engaged on scenario analysis in a very, very meaningful way. We actually, and we spoke extensively to clients. We said, look, let's look at a 3-month lockdown. Let's look at 6, 9. Then let's look at a scenario where lockdown is lifted, but people don't feel safe.
Correct.
And that allowed decisions to be done in a very, very calibrated way. And like everybody's spoken about, we spoke in a very open way to our teams so that they understood that the company is taking a very different approach. We're not doing a knee jerk. We're not just going and slashing jobs and things like that, because the news was all over the place by then. And our global clients really valued this. And, we started becoming a trusted partner.
Partner, correct.
Right? And moved from just being a provider. And to my mind, that was the biggest
that is key.
Gain from all of this. And then, separately, I can talk about some of the changes from a rating process point of view, because I know you have questions of the other panelists as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. Fascinating, really. Let's move to Alok. Alok, you have to give us a global perspective as well as a regional one. You've, as McKinsey, who better, who's seen how boards have reacted, how boards have approached the challenge, and what would you say that were the most challenging questions that the board asked you during this period?
No, thank you, Zia, and it's wonderful to be part of this panel. I think the most challenging questions really came when we set out forecasts back about a year ago that actually showed that India, for example, was on course for a -9% GDP hit for the year, and other such forecasts that were done on a bottom-up basis, on a sector-by-sector basis. And it was very challenging at the times here because every other organization, including the IMF, the various investment banks, the various rating agencies, were still in a positive territory at the time, right? And I remember some quite upset CEOs calling and saying, "You scared my board," because, and by the way, from the governments as well, both in India and elsewhere, because, at the time, you still had very positive, rosy projections of a V-shaped recovery. And our simple perspective was based on the micro understanding of every sector, whether it's logistics or transportation or infrastructure or consumer goods, saying that there is a disruption like this that just takes a long time to recover from. And, in many countries, we're still seeing recovery back to 2019-20 levels only occurring in 22-23, right? And this is not to and this is the reason I'm connecting to this board agenda, is that there was at the time a big gap between what the companies had projected, what the investment bank and rating agencies were projecting, relative to what we came up with based on this bottom-up. And that was the first series of conversations we had with boards, not just in India, but also in the rest of Asia and Europe, to say, well, what do you do about this? And the biggest single thing I've seen change there, including I happen to do about 30% of my work in the US, is the boards have put strategy back on the agenda. And we've often talked in board discussions about how much of it is just caught up in administrative and governance topics. And actually, this forced the strategy topic to go away from the annual strategy offsite, where there are rosy 3-year plans projected, to a real discussion about scenarios. What triggers do I need to look for? What are leading indicators, right, that I need to watch for? And therefore, what do I need to do? And that became a very fundamental board and management team discussion that has continued even to this day, which is a big shift from where we were 12 months ago, right? And so that to me was, a difficult question, which is by that time, and again, I don't pretend that we have any crystal ball at all, but what we tried to do is to say, look, let us create a set of coherent scenarios based on a bottom-up view of what's happening in every sector, every geography, the rebalancing of supply chains across China and others. What were distinguishing also, what were trends already underway? For example, a certain amount of diversification away from China. Relative
diversification of what?
Away from China, right? And this was, by the way, no means, and we tried to explain this to our Indian government as well, this is no means a rejection of China. It was much more China +1, which was already underway, which obviously got accelerated over the last 12 months. So a lot of the board discussion and the difficult questions were trying to distinguish what were factors that have got accelerated because of COVID, and what were factors that are new because of COVID, right? And at least our contention has been in most sectors, this is more an acceleration of trends that were underway. Whether it's obviously in terms of the digital transformation, whether it's in terms of more resilient supply chains. The fundamental thing that was new, going back to what Ashu and Sashi and others were saying, was really moving to a much more resilient supply chain. So if the second question the boards really asked us and spent time on, the first question was, give me more granular view of scenarios, triggers, and leading indicators. The second question that was difficult was, how do I build resilience? Right? Because, as we're seeing right now in India as well, there will be waves of lockdowns, of disruptions that keep occurring. And therefore, whether it's in terms of your supply chain, whether it's in your distributor relationships, your working capital limits, all of these things, your margin of safety has to be much higher than before. And a lot of the questions we then got were, what's the cost of building this resilience? Because, it's easy to say we want to be resilient, but to Ashu's point, you have to invest in it, right? It means that you're going to have more costs up front. You're going to create some degree of redundant infrastructure. You're going to pay more, because you need to,
Correct.
have a supply chain that's closer at hand. And that's a real cost. And, it took a while again for boards to come around to saying that this needs to be a cost that you can then explain to rating agencies, you can explain to equity analysts and investors as actually an appropriate and worthwhile cost because of the resilience it provides and obviously the risk-adjusted returns that the company is able to get. So that was the second difficult question because again, it's one of those things that's easy to say, we want to build in resilience, but harder to do when you're trying to both cut costs and remove all discretionary expense while also investing in, margin of safety. And you see this, whether it's in terms of companies on a very tactical level, investing, as you just said, in, hotel rooms and other things like that, that ultimately may or may not get used, to technology infrastructure, data center infrastructure, moving to redundant cloud hosting infrastructure. All of these things became things that we needed to balance very carefully. And the third point I'll make is...
Sorry, just to interrupt, was there a large cost to building up this resilience generally, or it was mainly IT related, or what was the sort of cost that you saw companies having to write a check about?
So the IT and people related costs were relatively small because most of this you can get on a variable cost basis and or you were able to negotiate a reasonably good deal at the time. I mean, in the scheme of a large company. But I think where it was more difficult is in deciding, for example, which of your distributors and suppliers you would actually support through this period. Right? Because often they were, SMEs or mid-sized companies, and moratorium or not, which occurred not just in India but elsewhere, you had to make a decision on which of them you wanted to support or not. So I remember
because they were facing their own back-end global supply challenges.
Exactly, right? And so that was a real investment that you needed to make, and that's where I remember, for example, working with an automotive company that actually said, look, there are 70% of our dealers that we want to really support, including in providing, different terms, like guaranteeing in some cases their lending facilities. But 30% we can't. Now, which 70% to keep, which 30% to not, is a real choice. It's not, this is, again, where the rubber hits the road. And often these were people that worked with them for 30 years, 40 years, and they had to go and say, sorry, I don't see the business potential in what you have. So these were difficult, right? These were difficult decisions. And the final thing that was obviously difficult was on the people side, right, Zia? So at the end of the day, unfortunately, a lot of companies had to furlough people, had to keep people off. I do think if I look globally at some of the programs, for example, in the UK on payroll protection was important and good to have done. I think the US programs were less effective because they were not well targeted enough. I think in India, frankly, we should have done more to protect employment in some way, shape, or form. But these are the sorts of questions the boards had to grapple with. So this combination of what are my options, how do I build resilience, and what do I do with people? And then what happened through the year, which was more pronounced than at least we had expected, was an extremely wide variation in performance within the same sector. So what started to happen is that if you start to get to the third and fourth quarter, and I'm sure you'll see this in this year's full year results, is then it didn't become a sector story anymore. It became a company within a sector. And that led to a real conversation on which of the management teams were using this as an opportunity to build new businesses, build new partnerships, leapfrog a lot of historical baggage.
Which is your strategy issue again.
But you're now starting to see the share price performance see a difference, right? So just to give you a sense in numbers terms, we found that the top quartile of companies in a sector had a share price performance almost 2.5 to 3x the bottom. So even though
nobody understands that, Alok, everybody's quite bemused at how the market is reacting to COVID.
But see, the market is reacting, but Zia, you know this better than me. The reality is the better companies are doing vastly better, right? Vastly better than the average. And that is playing out now. We can all argue as to how much of this is the Fed, et cetera, et cetera. I would speculate, I'm not the expert. However, the gap in performance in the same sector between companies that took decisive actions, that drove performance and did performance is a big gap. So the board conversations say by the third quarter shifted to now questioning the management teams to say, how is it that our competitors, what are our competitors doing relative to us? And when you start to see operating performance, and you see this in banking, you see this in automotive, you see this in IT services, it's quite remarkable that you look at the top 2 companies in any one of these sectors versus the median company. There's a massive performance gap that is arisen. So
I think it's what McKinsey. My bedtime reading every day is one of the McKinsey articles, I must tell you, and so the real issue that you've talked about a lot is the speed of strategic response.
Yes.
Apart from just thinking strategy and chewing up strategy, how do you actually have the speed to become purposive in the response? Is one of the very issues that you've been focused on.
I think that's what I'm connecting finally, just to make my point. Zia, is exactly that, which is we moved from a board level discussion about what to do and how to do it to now seeing a massive performance gap based on the speed of action and the decisiveness of action. And I think that's what boards will need to continue to focus on, because there's a lot of uncertainty still, right? I don't think we have to do anything. And therefore, this ability to balance speed, decisiveness, and resilience will mark companies out for the future.
Thank you. Kaku, last but never the least, I think, let's close with the big bang. Your Bank of America. So how are you seeing this play out in terms of credit, uncertainties for business? How are you reacting as a major lending institution? What is your level of interaction with boards during this time of disruption? And, what are the challenges that you see your customers facing? And as a bank, what do you see facing? Because we'll run a bit over, but we can then close after Kaku, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Kaku. Your floor is yours.
Yeah. Thanks, Zia. I think it was really good to hear everybody, and just to kind of share our experiences. We did have a lead time, like Ashu said, because US reacted with COVID much earlier, and you already had China and Hong Kong already taking the steps. So the firm was really prepared and had done a lot of work around, and we were already being inducted as all country heads on the responsibilities that would really be required in each. And the few different stakeholders was clients first, because you did need to take care of clients and kind of educating people. And, yes, we will have a panic within ourselves. We will have to take the steps, but not at the cost of the client. So create ecosystems that can sustain client interactions. That was the first task. Second, employees. How do you really take care? And, right from the firm really had gone to the extreme where all of us also received masks before the COVID hit. And each of us were sent 3 masks at home, which were high quality and which kind of, was something the firm went out. The other thing was that we had to set up ecosystems from a country to really have, so we had special lines where employees could reach out so that hospitals, everything for them or their families were really taken care of. And we had a whole system in place. And, it's always the front office, but that is when the operations, HR, COO, security, and basically, we also had a live event, kind of a special HR, which were put into action, and they became the point people for people to reach out so that immediate help could be taken. Then the next task given was, and which was very clear, is how do you keep sanitizing the office? Because banking being essential, you will need 5 to 7% of the workforce to be there for the clients. And how do you really take care of health? So the transport right to the detailing for people coming to work, including food, everything needed to be solved. And that was one thing. So on employee wellness, lots was done. Like Ashu said, we had a lot of shipments of basically technology. But then where the question came is you don't compromise client interaction or information, because you know in our industry, some leakage can really cost the firm a lot more.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that can also become big governance issues. So how do you really induct people that you are at home, you're not being probably looked upon in the same, the tracking is not that much, then how do you really ensure there's no recorded line to go back to? How do you really ensure? At the same time, your trading rooms have to be operative. So setting up trading rooms with internet was a big issue. So the shipping of computers was easy, but how do you really enable to get so people can get access to this? Because payments, while a bank, when you're clearing transactions, and if people are doing payments from home, it could get stuck if the lines really get fallen. So these are sensitive to a lot of clients, and your reconciliations with clients need to be done. Plus the clients don't have enough people to reconcile at their end. So a
Correct.
lot of their headache did become a part of our headache. And we needed to give that seamlessness. And the other thing that really helped was it was a great chance to really take leadership, because there was no BCP in the world which had thought that everyone in the whole globe would go down. So as India, how do you capture more? And I think this COVID time, we've been able to add around 3,000 jobs in India. We've taken on a lot more really work in India. And also Bank of America being very big in US, we really went out to do retail loans, retail help, small, medium, all of that. Some of these loads we really took on into India. And actually, I'm very happy to say, Zia, India outshone of many of the other countries,
Well
which I
done.
always feel very proud, because Indians can thrive in chaos. And I think this is the first time in the world that everybody had to thrive in chaos, and there were processes had to be reinvented. And I think that's where I think not just us, but a lot of our, uh, companies, I would say, in American companies who have outsourcing have really shone out, and each of them have really proved. To your point on boards and credit and all, there were a lot of calls. The first fortnight, I had to juggle with our own stuff, the movement, the people, giving the best onto the clients. At the same time, getting onto large companies and telling what needs to be done, how they should be thinking about banking on one hand, and how they should be thinking of really preserving cash. How do you think about building resiliences by availing, as it was highlighted earlier by Ashu, a lot of lines got cancelled. It happened world over. These were not committed lines, but in banking, as you know, there would be uncommitted lines. And normally, all banks globally would commit a lot more, because you will never have 100% utilization. So you would have like 50% utilization. But this is the time when everybody wanted the money. So, even bank had to rationalize
But
across.
that's what Rupen was saying, right? Everybody just drew down on all their cash lines and
Yeah.
whatever credit you had, so that it was in their bank account, and they wouldn't suffer the risk of you canceling it or withdrawing it.
And then, we had friends like Rupen and others for the mid and small size companies who really came in. And if you see, India got protected also with private equity, putting 47.5 billion just in India, and helping some of the mid and small size companies. And of course, they're going to make tons of money, and I love it. But the fact of it, that really came as help. And I think where we were a little behind compared to the world was in US, if you really saw, Fed gave a direction very soon in 1 week. And that's why the banks reacted, they gave in the lines, and then they went into debt markets. And actually globally, $3.3 trillion were raised, availing the small interest rates that they were prevalent. And people actually converted some of the short tenures into long tenures. And, it kind of helped because the NPA recognition norms were, well thought of. They said they will handle it, but they gave the assurances to the banks and they really moved into action. And frankly, people raised 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 40-year, even up to 100 years. And most of them averaged around 20 to 30 years of money. And that was the highest peak. And, I was just looking at it the other day. Even Bank of America was a part of almost 1.6 trillion transactions next to JP Morgan at 1.7. So that is the activity we were there. In India, we came a bit slow because the packages got announced very gradually. At the same time, banks, were wanting to help. The consortiums, this is the first time I felt public sector, private sector, foreign banks came together to try to see how you can resolve the situation. But there was no clear answer on NPA recognition. And banks, there was also a lot of worry globally with all the metrics on deficit that Indian banking sector looks very bad. And, there would be a downgrade, which would lead to a India downgrade. So a lot of education we had to do with the finance ministry, with SEBI, with RBI, that they really need to work hard. I think we needed to work. The rating agencies did their bit, but the NPA and the moratorium came a much bit later than many other countries. And I think in that short time, we did see a lot of stress. And then came the NBFC sector, which had multiplied many a times. And that's where I thought we did a good thing to announce TLTRO. And for once, I think some of the debt markets started getting on. And that was another big opportunity for everyone. And to your point, what we did encourage is giving loans to a lot of even multinationals who in turn gave it to the Indian vendors. So supply chain financing became a very big product. And we
Alok's point,
really
picking the vendors that you would support, right?
Yeah, and for them, because the end credit to the mid and small size was very big. So I think they played a bigger role in getting there. And, you could not really resist. And then finally on the boards, I think the thing that has changed in the last 6 months is first boards were asking, board members were really concerned, what will be my responsibility? How will I be evaluated?
And my liability.
A lot of board liabilities. So a lot of board members would call me, Kaku, what do you think? To know the banking aspect of it. I'm sure similarly they would have looked at you, Arshu, many others to see how their liability gets boxed. Yeah. It took 3 months actually for them to get there. But now I can say in the last 3-4 months, because we've been actively pushing ESG, and ESG has been very big, and sustainability. Now I feel boards have started talking about sustainability, employee wellness, etc. I think one thing still missing in India is diversity and inclusion, Zia. And I think you should help us take the leadership on this.
We've run out of time because that would be a topic I could go on forever, as you know. We haven't been able to hit ESG in this session, but I think I better bring it to a close if the next session is at 12:45. So to the audience, I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. I've learned a lot. I've made my notes like a good lawyer to follow up with my fellow panelists post the session. It's really been an eye-opener. I think the pandemic won't last forever, but our learnings will last for a long, long time. And I think if Alok says we have to see an opportunity in this, then this is the opportunity. And, Shashi's 5 crisis attacks and how he's weathered them really struck home from my point of view. As Ashu said, I felt my problem seemed very little after hearing Shashi, actually. But
he should write a book for sure.
Sorry?
He should write a book for sure.
Well, as I always say, somebody who writes a book will make more money on royalty probably than their business. So, but thank you all of you so much. It's really been a pleasure, first of all, to catch up with all my friends and then to hear what you had to say. Vikas, thank you at CII for giving all of us this opportunity. I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you, Prerak, my partner who's been the backbone of this session for me. And to the audience, I hope you had a good time.
Thank you.
So thank you all
Thanks, Zia.
the panelists. Thank you, Zia. And I'm really sorry that we have completed run of time because we could have gone on, and it's been quite an engaging and learning experience, I'm sure, for all the participants. And I think the key message, what I can gather from Mr. Shetty's comments is that crisis brings an opportunity, and this reminds us on the quote that tough times never last, but tough people do. So I think on this positive note, thank you very much, everyone.
And Vikas, tough people play golf also sometimes.
It was another opportunity of the crisis.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Zia, for moderating and for supporting to CI as always. Thank you everyone.
Pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.